All right, Section 3, the Taft Administration, Chapter 18. Let's just double back and read this little blurb about Yosemite. Story of Yosemite. Breathtaking valley, Yosemite Valley, has always astounded visitors in California's High Sierra. In 1851, volunteer soldiers came to the valley. One officer felt a peculiar, exalted sensation as he marveled at his surroundings. The officer's reaction was a natural one. Carved by glaciers and rivers, the 7-mile-long valley into which he and his men rode lies at an elevation of 4,000 feet. Above them rose the near-vertical cliffs and great granite monoliths of El Capitan, Half Dome, and Cathedral Rocks. Down onto the valley floor poured the waters of Bridal Veil Fall. A dozen other waterfalls spilled over sheer cliffs elsewhere in the valley, some of them, like Yosemite Falls, at 2,425 feet, among the highest on Earth. Within 5 years, horseback parties were coming to gaze at Bridal Veil Fall and the face of El Capitan. The tourists had found Yosemite. To guarantee that the public could continue to enjoy the beauty, in 1864, President Abraham Lincoln granted the valley to California as a wilderness preserve. In so doing, Lincoln laid the foundation for the national park system. The first official national park, Yellowstone, was not created until 8 years later. By the late 1880s, Yosemite was attracting about 5,000 visitors a year. John Muir and other conservationists were anxious to preserve the area. Muir had spent years tramping through the woods, up and down the mountains and glaciers of the park. His compelling descriptions swayed many influential people. In 1890, Congress expanded the protected area and made Yosemite an official national park. In many ways, Yosemite established a pattern for our national park system. It started programs to teach visitors about native plants and wildlife and was the first park to build a museum to help visitors understand and enjoy the region. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt visited the park with Muir. The natural beauty of the valley captivated the environmentalist president and stimulated his desire to protect vast areas of the country. "We are not building this country of ours for a day," declared Roosevelt. "It is to last through the ages." During his presidency, Roosevelt enlarged Yosemite, established the U.S. Forest Service, and put millions of acres of land under federal protection. In 1916, the National Park Service was established, and today it manages more than 380 areas, including 57 national parks. All right, Taft Administration, Section 3. President Taft, main idea. President Taft continued with Roosevelt's progressive policies, but he did not live up to the expectations of many progressives. Key terms and names: Joseph G. Cannon, the Payne-Aldrich Tariff, Richard Ballinger, Syndicate, Insubordination. An American Story. One evening in January 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt sat chatting with Secretary of War William Howard Taft and his wife Nellie in the second-floor White House library. The mood was relaxed. Seated comfortably in his easy chair, Roosevelt was talking about a subject he had often discussed with his guests: the future role of Taft. Roosevelt toyed with a couple of options. "At one time, it looks like the presidency," he mused, considering a future role for his trusted lieutenant. "Then again, it looks like the Chief Justiceship." The Tafts knew that Roosevelt had the power to bring about either of these options. Make it the presidency, interrupted Nellie Taft, always ambitious about her husband's career. Taft himself was less convinced that he would make a good chief executive. Make it the chief justiceship, he uttered. In the end, Taft bowed to the wishes of his wife and his boss. Following George Washington's example and honoring his own promise of 1904, Roosevelt decided not to seek re-election in 1908. Instead, he endorsed an experienced administrator and moderate progressive to run for president on the Republican ticket, William Howard Taft. Taft becomes president. Roosevelt loved smiling Bill Taft like a brother and believed him to be the ideal person to continue his policies. He was, Roosevelt said, a leader who possessed a scorn of all that is base and mean, a hearty sympathy with the oppressed, and a kindly generosity of nature which makes him feel that all his countrymen are in very truth his friends and brothers. Taft had been Roosevelt's most trusted lieutenant. He had served as a judge, as governor of the Philippines, and as Roosevelt's Secretary of War. In fact, Taft seemed acceptable to almost everyone. Thanks to Roosevelt's efforts, he easily received his party's nomination. His victory in the general election in November 1908 was a foregone conclusion. The Democratic candidate, twice defeated William Jennings Bryan, lost once more. Taft's approach to government. My dear Theodore, Taft wrote to his old friend a couple of weeks after assuming office. I am addressed as Mr. President. I turn to see whether you are at my elbow. The comment was telling. In that same letter, Taft admitted some of his early fears about his presidency. I have no doubt when you return, you will find me very much under suspicion. I have not the prestige which you had. I am not attempting quite as much as you did. And so I fear that a large part of the public will feel as if I had fallen away from your ideals. But you know me better and will understand that I am working away on the same old plan. Roosevelt and Taft were very different people. Roosevelt was a dynamic person who loved the spotlight and the rough and tumble world of politics. He had grand ideas and schemes, but left the details of administering them to others. Taft was the opposite in many ways. He was a skillful administrator and judge. He disliked political maneuvering and preferred to avoid conflict with others. Unlike Roosevelt, who acted quickly and decisively on issues, Taft responded slowly, approaching problems from a legalistic point of view. I don't like politics, he wrote. I don't like the limelight. Although committed to many progressive ideas, Taft's personality and approach to politics quickly brought him into conflict with progressives. The Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act. Like many progressives, Taft believed high tariffs limited competition, hurt consumers, and protected trust. Roosevelt warned him to stay away from the tariff reform because it would divide the Republican Party. Taft, however, went ahead and called Congress into special session to lower tariff rates. To pass a new tariff, Taft needed the help of Speaker of the House Joseph G. Cannon. Key name, key term. Joseph G. Cannon. As Speaker, Cannon appointed all committees and decided which bills they handled. By exercising almost total control over debate, Cannon could push some bills through without discussion and see that others never came to a vote. Progressives, however, wanted to unseat Cannon because he often blocked their legislation. Taft disagreed with the effort to unseat Cannon. He pressured progressive Republicans into stopping their campaign against Cannon. In exchange, Cannon quickly pushed the tariff bill through the House of Representatives. Taft's compromise angered many progressives. following year, they defied the president by joining with House Democrats and removing Cannon from power. Taft further alienated progressives when the tariff bill went into the Senate. The powerful head of the Senate Finance Committee, Republican Nelson Aldrich from Rhode Island, wanted to protect high tariffs, as did many other conservative senators. The result was the Payne-Aldrich tariff, key name, key term. The Payne-Aldrich tariff, which cut tariffs hardly at all and actually raised them on some goods. After discussions with Aldrich and other senators, however, Taft decided to accept the new tariff. Progressives felt betrayed and outraged by Taft's decision. I knew the fire had gone out of the progressive movement, recalled Chief Forester Gifford Pinchot after Roosevelt left office. Washington was a dead town. Its leader was gone, and in its place was a man whose fundamental desire was to keep out of trouble. The Ballinger-Pinchot controversy. With Taft's standing among Republican progressives deteriorating, a sensational controversy broke out late in 1909 that helped destroy Taft's popularity with reformers for good. Many progressives have been unhappy when Taft replaced Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior, James R. Garfield, in an aggressive conservationist with Richard A. Ballinger. Key name, key term, Richard A. Ballinger, a more conservative corporate lawyer. Suspicion of Ballinger grew when he tried to make nearly 1 million acres of public forests and mineral reserves available for private development. In the midst of this mounting concern, Gifford Pinchot charged the new secretary with having once plotted to turn over valuable public lands in Alaska to a private syndicate. Key name, key term, as a private syndicate or a business group for personal profit. Pinchot took the charges to the president. Taft's attorney general investigated the charges and decided they were groundless. Still not satisfied, Pinchot leaked the story to the press and asked Congress to investigate. Taft fired Pinchot for insubordination. Key word, key term, fired for insubordination or disobedience. The congressional committee appointed to study the controversy cleared Ballinger. By signing the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act, supporting Ballinger against the Pinchot, and backing Cannon, Taft gave the impression that he had sold the square deal down the river. Popular indignation was so great that the congressional elections of 1910 resulted in a sweeping Democratic victory, with Democrats taking the majority of the House and Democrats and progressive Republicans grabbing control of the Senate from the conservatives. The activities of the mining companies expanded the national forests. Taft's progressive reforms. Despite his political problems, Taft had several successes. Although Roosevelt was nicknamed the Trustbuster, Taft was a strong supporter of competition and actually brought twice as many antitrust cases in 4 years as his predecessor had done in 7. In other areas, too, Taft was at least as strong a progressive as Roosevelt. Taft established the Children's Bureau, key name, key term, the Children's Bureau, a federal agency similar to Roosevelt's Bureau of Corporations. The Children's Bureau investigated and publicized problems with child labor. Taft also supported the Mann-Elkins Act. Key name, key term, the Mann-Elkins Act of 1910, which increased the regulatory powers of the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC. The Ballinger-Pinchot controversy aside, Taft was also a dedicated conservationist. His contributions in this area actually equaled or surpassed those of Roosevelt. He set up the Bureau of Mines to monitor the activities of the mining companies, expanded the national forest, and protected water power sites from private development. After Taft took office in 1909, Roosevelt left for a big game hunt in Africa, followed by a tour of Europe. He did not return to the United States until June 1910. Although disturbed by stories of Taft's betrayal of progressivism, Roosevelt at first refused to criticize the president. In October 1911, Taft announced an antitrust lawsuit against U.S. Steel, claiming that the company's decision to buy the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company in 1907 had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. That lawsuit was the final straw for Roosevelt. As president, he approved the U.S. Steel's plan to buy the company. Roosevelt believes Taft's focus on breaking up trust was destroying the carefully crafted system of cooperation and regulation that Roosevelt had established with big business through the Bureau of Corporations. In November 1911, Roosevelt publicly criticized Taft's decision. Roosevelt argued that the best way to deal with the trusts was to allow them to exist while at the same time increasing government's ability to regulate them. Having broken with Taft, it was only a matter of time before progressives convinced Roosevelt to re-enter politics. In late February 1912, Roosevelt announced that he would enter the presidential campaign in 1912 and attempt to replace Taft as the Republican nominee for president. Check for understanding, define syndicate, and insubordination. That was a pretty dull section. All right. So that ends our reading of section 3, chapter 18.